My name is Dr. Jorge Anderson. I'm originally a son of New Jersey. I am I have been fighting for civil rights all of my life, starting with the March on Washington in 1962. I joined the military, the United States Air Force, in 1982, August 2nd, 1982, because of my belief that I owed America something for the great country that it was, because I felt that liberty and justice did not come for free, but it was important that we give something back to our country. In March of 2003, my brother, 2004, March of 2004, my half-brother, Halcott Greaves, stole a piece of United States mail from my mother that was under a power of attorney that she had given me. He took that stolen mail and filed the complaint because he could not get the property that he wanted. He could not get the house that we were living in that he wanted to steal. The end result of it was that my mother was placed under a guardianship on August the 24th, 2004, and it began her imprisonment for the rest of her life. One of the things that was most regrettable about my mother's imprisonment, the records will show that I, in the first year, took my mother out of that nursing home on many day jaunts for over 40 days. But during the same time period, my half-brother showed his interest in my mother by leaving her there. He never even took her out for an ice cream cone. In the later years of her life, the last time that she left before dying the nursing home was to go for her 85th birthday to her favorite church, St. Antoninus in Newark, New Jersey. We lived in Newark all of my life. With a short time, we lived in Georgia. But New Jersey has inclement weather in the winter, and my mother's doctor, after diagnosing her with atypical Parkinson's because she was falling, said that she needed exercise. This began us to look at other places to live in order to fight Parkinson's, dementia, to keep her walking during the winter months. I told my brother that my mother needed to move. "You're going to take her away from me," he says. And I said, "She needs this for her health." "You're taking her away from me." And within days, I was served with paperwork from the court ordering me to come to court to start a guardianship procedure for my mother. My brother was working in collusion with my mother's sister, Helen Hundley of Washington, D.C. Helen Hundley was a senior social worker in Washington, D.C., who happened to work with Grace Lomax. Grace Lomax is a Alpha Kappa Alpha in Washington, D.C., who is a senior social worker for the city of Washington, D.C., who is also the mother of a New Jersey probate judge by the name of Renee Jones Weeks. It's Grace Lomax Jones, I'm sorry. Her mother's name is Grace Lomax Jones. But Judge Weeks was the second judge in my mother's case. After about a year of spending $35,000 on 4 different lawyers to try to handle this case, to bring it to an end, no one was interested in bringing it into an end. They wanted me to give more and more information, and they didn't ever ask my brother just one simple question, which any judge has an obligation to do, especially when it comes to an elder and a greedy child. If a child comes to your courtroom with a parent's bank statement that they happen to obtain without a search warrant, the court has an obligation to an American citizen to protect their right to privacy. One question could have ended this in the beginning of the trial, which is, very simply, how did you get this? Did you have permission to get this? If you did, is it written? If it's not written, then how did you get this? Did you have a subpoena for this evidence? that that's in your possession that's not addressed to you but to your parent. The court never once asked my brother that, because the court of New Jersey saw an opportunity to cannibalize a poor black woman who had a piece of property in the city of Newark, New Jersey. Now, a police report was filed for this piece of stolen mail. The court has ignored that police report. I've had to spend my life savings. I've had to walk away from my career. In several incarnations, I trained flight attendants for American Airlines. I was a caterer for movie production here in Los Angeles. I walked away from a nice career in 1997 because my half-brother did not call me for over a month after my mother fell and broke her back. This is despite me calling him every 2 weeks, but the 1 month I decided to take time off to save myself from a high phone bill. That month, I found out that my brother was actually doing things behind my back, stealing. I immediately left what I was doing. I did not want to move back to New Jersey, so I opted to move to Washington, D.C. While I was in Washington, I was there campaigning to help myself through another discriminatory act in employment by American Airlines. And I was canvassing Capitol Hill and working on veterans issues as well as my own. The main purpose of being back east was to have greater access to my mother. And as her health began to decline in 2003, I had bought a home in Washington, and I sold the home in 2004 in order to move her to a warmer state. It was my intention to keep our home in New Jersey because you don't rip old people out of their home. And even if they require a warmer climate, it was my intention to bring my mother back and forth between New Jersey. Unfortunately, the judge, sensing an opportunity for the state to make money, Judge Mary C. Jacobson, placed my mother under a guardianship because I had entered a catering contract for $100,000 to help pay for my mother's bills. Long story short side of it, mother was placed under the guardianship. We were supposed to review this within 30 days. The attorney never filed any of the paperwork, and it took me a year to get back in court. In December of 2006, I filed a complaint with the court with Judge Renee Jones Weeks. When I came into Judge Weeks's court, I found out that she was from Washington, D.C. When I tried to question her of her background, she tried to hide and say, oh, I don't want to talk about that. She always would skirt the question and deny me what I was asking. Long story short side of it is, I found out upon her retirement that her mother and my aunt were co-workers. When I called my aunt 2 years ago on her birthday, she's screaming, I got a root canal, but my soror has done my hatchet work for me. Meaning that she was an AKA. Grace Lomax Jones, my aunt, were co-workers for the city of Washington, D.C. And Renee Jones Weeks was a president of a chapter of AKA. She said that she did not know my aunt, but anyone that has good reading comprehension in reading the judge's retirement announcement can figure out that she did know my aunt, since her mother worked with my aunt. Not only did her mother work with my aunt, but my first cousin, my aunt's oldest daughter, was in school with the judge at the same time at the same high school in Washington, D.C. So the likelihood of them not knowing each other was very, very slim to non-existent. The judge, when I would make complaints about the treatment, not getting information on my mother, despite being my mother's health proxy, The judge ended up setting a precedent for the Office of the Public Guardian, requiring them to give monthly reports on the 10th of every month. In the 4 years, I got 20, maybe 20 reports in 4 years, but it wasn't anywhere near the 48 that I was supposed to receive. My mother died this past January. The last 4.5 years of her life, I was not able to see her, simply because of the corruption that took place in 2 states. When I filed the complaint in December of 2006, the trial was scheduled for February of 2007, March of 2007, May of 2007. And in May 2007, I was still caring for my mother's service dogs, hoping to get them home, get her back to her service dogs, and let her love them as much as she did. While I was in New Jersey, the management of my building had a change. One of the managers began to call me faggot because she knew of the lawsuit in which my brother was accusing me and saying that faggots had no rights. So she began to call me faggot. She also began to call me Jorge, which my name is spelled Jorge. It's Scottish. It is not Jorge, it's George. I know if you come from a background of Spanish, I'm very forgiving because I have plenty of Spanish friends that call me Jorge in jest, but they know when they officially address me, they say George. The end result of it is the manager began to call me out of my name. She began to call me faggot. She would bang on the door all times of night. And when I complained to the management of the building, they told me to switch managers and they were going to make this man, Johnny Ruzel, the manager, that he would handle my keys and everything like that. In May, when I had to go to the court hearing, Johnny Ruzel told me that he would watch my service dogs. I was gone approximately 9 days. When I returned, I found a note on the door where my babies had been forced to suffer. We lost 1 and 5 survived. And it was very difficult. I ended up moving from Tujunga, where my apartment was, to Long Beach to get into place for my service dogs. The city of Los Angeles returned my service dogs, but there was a veterinarian that worked for Animal Emergency Center in Studio City by the name of Tracy Reese. She fostered one of my dogs. My dogs were, we had so many as a result of finding out that my mother had Alzheimer's. My mother had 2 dogs. I had 2 dogs. I had a poodle and a schnoodle who was with me for well over 15 years. And I had a poodle who I bought in 2000. How I found out that my mother had Alzheimer's, the beginning of Alzheimer's, was that in 2004, there was her dog went into heat, and I asked her to kennel the dog. I had to go to the store. I was gone like maybe 25 minutes. When I came back, she had let the dogs out. I said, Mom, if you do this again, we're going to have to take you to get her checked, because my brother was treating her like just ruthlessly. She would have to pay a bill, and she'd have to beg him for a check. He had taken her checks from her. Her phone would go off. The bill would not be paid. She paid him to do, he was a contractor, she would pay him to do work on the house. He wouldn't do it, or half do it, leave it unfinished. Just horrible things. I grew tired of it. I was the administrator for my dad's estate, and because I was the administrator, my brother didn't realize that his power had a limit. And what he tried to do was to control Mom so that he could get the house to drain the money from it. When I stood up to him and told him that my mother needed warmer climates to keep exercising, that's how he started the case. But the dogs, the first year, we had 1 puppy. His name was Armstrong. Armstrong was born, the only one to the litter. In fact, he was born in the back seat of my mother's car coming from my home in Washington, D.C. to New Jersey. When that pup was born, the next year, I told my mom all the next year, I said, Mom, now remember, if your dog goes into heat, you cannot let them mate. If you do, I'm going to have to take Calcott up on trying to get you checked for the memory problems. About a year later, in November of 2004, her dog went into heat, and the situation arose again, had to go to the store. I come back, they're mating. The next day, I told Mom, I said, I'm taking you to the doctor to get you checked to make sure you're not losing your memory. She's like, oh, I know. She would become belligerent, and I took her, and we found out that she had the beginning onset of Alzheimer's. The dogs played an important part in my mother's disease because as the Alzheimer's progressed, I couldn't get my mom to do things for me, but I could tell the dogs, come, get Grandma to let you out. And she would get up and it would encourage her to walk. It would encourage my mother to do things when she wouldn't do when I would ask her to do. So I began to see the effect that the dogs were having on my mother's care and that they were important. And out of that litter, 3 girls were born. One died at 21 days. One died when we were in Tahunga because of starvation. She was 4 pounds. That was Raquel. The one that died at 21 days was Rebecca. And then there was Judith. And Judith and my mother were inseparable. And she loved her very much. She loved Armstrong very much. And I have a picture that I'd like to show a little bit later of her holding the dogs. Well, when I told the courts here, when they did the criminal investigation from the County of Los Angeles for animal cruelty, I told the investigators what happened. I showed them the proof that I had that I was in court and the dogs were returned to me. Dr. Tracy Reese, the day I came to pick up the dogs, August the 21st, 2007, came and tried to offer me a check for my service dogs. I showed her the doctor's notes that they were service dogs. She says, oh, well, let's just be friends. Give me your name, address, and email. And I, like a fool, trust her. I said, the dogs are not for sale. My oldest dog was an inside dog. They kept him outside, and he came home with kennel cough. One night, it was really bad. She promised that she just wanted to be a friend to help. She says to me, George, give me the dogs, and I promise I'll get them well, and I'll give them back. I'll even sign a contract that I won't convert the dogs. She signs the contract. 3 days later, she changes the Avid Pet Track chips in my dog. She gives Judith to one of her coworkers, and then starts to bill me, even though she said that the bill would be used towards my mother's, she would help me to fight the corruption in New Jersey. This woman told me I would get used to the dogs. I went through a nervous breakdown. I ended up homeless because I ended up being evicted from the apartment that I was in that killed the dogs. When I went to the city of Los Angeles, who'd given me the dogs back, Don Kochik, the city attorney who made the decision to return the dogs, told me he took a lot of heat. When I talked to David Scheinman in the prosecutor's office, he told me, I don't think she's doing anything wrong. I served in this country so that justice could be had by all. And how I was treated was as a black man, as a liar, a thief, or a buffoon. And the thing is that I'm a PhD. I've worked hard to get to where I am. I'm very happy that my mother lived to see me get my PhD, but I'm extremely let down in the justice system of my country because of the harm that it brought my family. My mother was my best friend, and I'd go to my grave fighting for her. Because my mother, when I was 2 years old, stood up for civil rights and took me to the March on Washington with Dr. King. It's some of my earliest memories. Being 17 days younger than the President of the United States, he's born on the 4th of August, 1961. I'm born on the 22nd of August, 1961. We are worlds away. I have gone to Congress. I've spoken to the Special Committee on Aging. I asked for help. I wanted to so badly to see my mother alive, but I couldn't find the fortitude to go back, to tell her that I had lost everything. Tracy Reese caused me not to be able to see my mother because she stole my service dogs. I took, from 2007 to 2009, I was not able to correspond with the courts of New Jersey. When I finally got enough stamina back together to get back into the game, the judges had changed to Walter Kaprowski. I wrote to Walter Kaprowski and I told him of what had happened to my mother's dogs. I had told them of the significance they played in my mother's life. I had spoken to the Office of the Public Guardian, who said, oh, you get old, you start collecting dogs. And they had no idea that the reason that I kept the dogs were because they were a symbol of my mother's Alzheimer's, and they were able to help me to deal with my mom and to get her to be motivated to take care of herself. Tracy Reese is a white woman. She went into a small claims court. I sued her. And the first time I sued her, I showed the judge the note, the doctor's note from a OS doctor, not just an MD. An OS doctor is what we have at the VA. An OS means that a doctor's license is good in 50 states. They are a federal doctor authorized by an act of Congress, USC 13, to handle veterans' issues. My doctor, because of my PTSD and depression, had recommended that I keep my service dogs as a part of my treatment. Tracy Reese told me I would just have to get used to it. Tracy, I have never threatened you. I have never done anything but fought for my dogs. You have never helped me. You lied and you deprived my mother of her dogs. And I'm here today to make sure that your name is known to America for the common thief you are and the harm that you brought to this U.S. veteran and my elderly mother, a black woman. She got in court and told the court that she was afraid for her life. I have called her. I may have used foul language, but I never threatened her. I'm a Christian. I'm a third-order Franciscan within my church. I live a religious life. And in that life, I do no harm to any living human being. When I was in the Air Force, I took up arms to defend this nation against enemies, and I'm still defending this nation against enemies, foreign and domestic. But I don't do it with a gun. I do it through my legislature, I do it through the courts, and I hold people to their duties once they've sworn an oath. But I mean no person in this country any harm whatsoever because of the vow I've taken as a third-order Franciscan. If I cannot help somebody, I don't do anything to harm them. For me to have this happen to me, it has been debilitating. I've lost my home in New Jersey because of the corruption. Judge Weeks set the house for sale. The house was worth $355,000. She put the house price, even though I had a sale for $225,000, she denied the sale, set it at $150,000, and we were $175,000, which we were forced out in October 2005. Without the house, that ended my right of visitation with my mother because I have nowhere to stay in the state of New Jersey. Now the state keeps expecting me to come back to the state of New Jersey in the winter, all times of year, when they know that I can't afford to pay for airfare, hotel, and survive in Southern California. On my fixed income, most of my income goes for rent. A portion goes to help veterans that are in need, and then the rest I attempt to live off of. Usually it's less than $1,000 a month. I do this because even though I have gotten my reward from the VA in compensation for being a disabled veteran, there are still veterans out there that are worse off than me. My case went on from 2009, when I first contacted to Judge Kaprowski, all the way up until this 2 weeks ago, yesterday, which would have been the 17th of September. The judge, when I asked him a direct question, how can you still hear this case when you were named in a federal complaint? How can you dismiss the charges against you that I made in the complaint against you for conspiracy? He hangs up the phone on me and then awards the state of New Jersey's Office of the Public Guardian $12,000 and their retained attorney, Lawrence Rosa, $10,000. The Office of the Public Guardian uses Lawrence Rosa to do the financial accounting. Lawrence Rosa charges every victim $10,000. He goes, he uses lies, he uses trickery, he threatens. He called me that told me if I didn't do something, I did so at my own peril. He acts in ways that are conduct unbecoming of a judicial officer, being that he's an officer of the court. But all of this was condoned by Judge Kaprowski. In January of 2011, Judge Kaprowski ordered a guardian ad litem who had previously lied on witnesses and given false testimony to do a report, which was due before the court on January 31st, 2011. She interviewed everybody but me, said that my mother was in great pain, and that because my mother was in great pain, that the conversation, she winced whenever I was on the phone. How she knew this, I'll never know, because half the time I was never allowed to talk to my mother. But on February 1st, 2011, I had a conversation with my mother's nurse, who wanted to know, your mother's not in any pain. Your mother's not. Who said that? So I was recording the conversation. I had that conversation transcribed and submitted it to Judge Kaprowski in evidence of the fraud that was being pulled upon the court. But being that the court had appointed this lawyer, the judge didn't even allow me to attend the hearing. Why? Because the day before I was supposed to leave to come to New Jersey, the judge sends me a letter at 3 o'clock in the afternoon Pacific Standard Time, 6 o'clock there, I'm about to board the plane, telling me to leave my service dog at home. This would have been the first time that I had been in New Jersey since the last service dogs were stolen and injured. And I did not go. When I told them of why I was not there, because he would not give me a codicil, a letter of introduction, because of the New Jersey doesn't recognize service dogs for disabled veterans, at least at that time. Their laws did not. When I asked him to give me a letter of introduction for transportation, he refused. A simple administrative request required under the ADA. And because of that, he did not hear me. He knew that I was indigent. So he turns around and he fines me $220. This is after my brother, under testimony in May of 2007, had requested that my mother remain in Windsor Gardens, the substandard nursing home in New Jersey, because it was 10 to 12 minutes away from his home. My brother, 1 year after 2007, sold his property in New Jersey and moved to North Carolina. So my mother died alone because he moved to North Carolina. He got $500,000 for all of his property and was able to move there. So when Mother died, she died alone. I did not get at all to see my mother, as I said. And on January 26th, while praying for another victim of New Jersey corruption by the name of Barbara Brookman, who was in court because of a corrupt office of the public guardian, they had a doctor by the name of Nicholas Guattari. Now, Nicholas Guattari is a very strange doctor because when you meet him, he's very animated, and I commonly have called him a quack because he routinely over-medicates the elderly when they're put into Newark Beth Israel Hospital. Dr. Guattari, on January 26, testified in Barbara Brookman's case. And when he testified in Barbara Brookman's case, he was working with the local prosecutor to frame Barbara Brookman for a bed sore that she found on a friend. When she tried to get help, the police arrested her for neglect because she didn't know what it was. The end result of it is that they took Barbara's friend Florence Siegel and isolated Florence for 4 years. Dr. Guattari was the initial doctor that saw Florence and was the initial doctor that saw my mother. When I saw my mother was issued psychotropic drugs. The Office of the Public Guardian social worker by the name of Judith Englander had told the hospital not to give me any information, but being the snoop that I am and my mother's health proxy, I was able to get a hold of my mother's chart and found out that she was issued psychotropic drugs to calm her, to get her so that she wouldn't be able to respond and to make her appear worse. We called Dr. Guattari about 2 years ago. I disguised my voice. And he told me on a recording that for $50 and for 15 minutes, he could declare any elderly person in New Jersey incompetent. He did it all the time. He worked with another doctor, a group of doctors that did this. Dr. Guattari went to the prosecutor's office on January 26th to be coached by him for his testimony on January 27th. While I was in prayer, the phone rang, and it was the Office of the Public Guardian to tell me on the 26th that my mother had died. On my mother's death certificate, according to Dr. Guattari, who signed it, he says that mother died at 1:30 on the 27th of January, which is fraud. This case, my case, is one of the longest in New Jersey history because it started in 2004 and it ended just this year. In the last hearing was just a couple of weeks ago. And during that time, I found out that there was a veteran who was in the same court under Judge Kaprowski, subjecting one of the veteran's children to the same isolation. His name is Gary Johnson. Gary and I began to notice a pattern. We found another judge in New Jersey by the name of Judge McVeigh, who is under indictment for using a pattern of racketeering and corruption. Judge Kaprowski uses a couple of cases that led the way that were established by Judge McVeigh. And he uses that to criminalize the loving family member that speaks up for their family. We have a major problem in New Jersey. And that problem is that we have judges that are opportunistic. Judges sit on a bench. Bench is Latin for bank. When you go before a judge is a state employee and the state is his employer. The judge is the biggest toll taker for any given state. So that every time that you have to pay fines and fees, the state gets the biggest revenue from their judges. This is why my home was gentrified and sold for half price 5 months after it was sold by the judge's order at 175, the house turned over at 120 Littleton Avenue, Newark, New Jersey. It sold for $355,000. We were cheated out of that money. The end result of it is, this was okay because I'm just a black male from Newark, and everybody knows that supposedly that criminals come from Newark. Well, I am not a criminal. I don't steal. I never do anything to harm my mother. I pampered my mother. I adored my mother. And despite the many witnesses that told the truth of the care that I gave my mother, the court removed her from my care. I want Congress to stop this. I want Congress to stop taking people's children and doing this. I want judges to stop being opportunistic to make revenue, to gentrify neighborhoods, to make sure that people get the full value of their home. As a disabled veteran, when this case began, the state of New Jersey owed me something because I gave my health in defense of this nation. And that they owed me was that I would be entitled to the homestead that my father left for me. I had a right to it, but the Office of the Public Guardian would not let me invoke my right to joint tenancy. They wanted to pay for the nursing home. So we lost our home. I am not anyone special. This happens in Michigan. This happens in Colorado. This happens in Missouri. It happens in New York. And I've cited for you at least 4 cases: Barbara Bookman, my case, the many cases under Judge McVeigh, Michael Belasco of Southern New Jersey, who his father was a veteran, who owned many acres of property which the state of New Jersey stole. When I deal with that case, when I was dealing with that case, I had to handle the case in California on my own before the small claims court. The first judge told me to refile. I refiled. The commissioner returned the dogs, but did not force the woman to return the dogs to me. She appealed the decision, and she says, just give it to him, I'll get it on an appeal. When we go to the appeal, we appeared for Judge Patrick Madden, and she told Patrick Madden that I'm a veterinarian and I was not allowed to speak at the trial. She had nothing to contribute because she was not there. She did not know the circumstances. She just was the first responder that the city brought the dogs to. And under very prejudicial circumstances, she assumed that because I'm a black male that I have no business with 6 dogs at that time and the one that died. We lost the dogs. I still hope that maybe one day I will have my dogs returned to me, but my poor mother has never gotten to see her dogs. That may not be important to a lot of Americans, but one of the reasons that I served in the United States military was because we have to protect the weak. If the weakest of us are forced through acquiescence, through a court hearing, through people who do not consider what the elder wants when they're placed under a guardianship, what the veteran wants when they have traumatic brain injury, and they take their funds, leave them in a nursing home, that's imprisonment, and it's wrong. A veteran, a person with Alzheimer's, is not an nincompoop. They have a memory problem, but they're a human being. Oftentimes, they're unable to say what they want. But when they are able to say what they want, they're often ignored like it doesn't matter. And to me, that just defies human dignity. I think that because we have a great Constitution that is supposed to protect our civil rights, that this is something that shouldn't be sneezed at by judges. You cannot take someone's property without due process. You cannot take someone's property without understanding all of the facts. And just because I stood in Patrick Madden's court and he saw the picture of my mother, but he denied her presence and need of those dogs in favor of this woman, a veterinarian, who was allowed to diagnose for my service-connected disability, telling him that I was a faker, she said that if she sued me, what could she hope to gain? Because I claim to be a disabled veteran. I have federal certification that I'm 100% service-connected, but yet I claim to be a disabled veteran. I would like Congress to make sure that this doesn't happen to any other elderly person. I would like Congress to make sure that this happens to no other veteran. This is what I'd like to see Congress do. Instead of the infighting, obstructionism, the not handling the nation's business, do something. And to the 112th Congress that removed the Civil Rights Commission, you need to restore it. Because you have stopped people like me from seeking help, redress, from a legislative branch that had been there for over 140 years.